become dangerous, and success will seek you out. Dark strategies for liberation. The world is not kind. It is hierarchical. While you believe in justice, social contracts, and ethical treatment, you are already being packed into a container for consumption. You are biological fuel for those who understood the rules of the game before you did. Your empathy is your Achilles heel. Your fear of appearing bad is your leash. I am not here to comfort you. My task is to dissect your illusion of security and show how the mechanisms of dominance erase your personality. We shall begin with the basics of social biology. In nature, there is no concept of evil. There is only efficiency. If you do not represent a threat, you do not deserve respect. You deserve only exploitation. Welcome to the reality where success is a side effect of your ability to become dangerous. Chapter 1. The Effect of Imaginary Security 1. Phase: Collision. A glass office on the 42nd floor in the city. Julian Vance sat opposite his partner, Arthur Sterling. The air in the office seemed thin, like in a pressure chamber. Julian had just finished presenting the annual report, expecting well-deserved praise. He worked 14 hours a day. He was a good guy. He met all deadlines. Arthur remained silent. 10 seconds. 20. In the silence, only the faint hum of the ventilation system was audible. Arthur did not look at the charts. He looked at Julian's hands, which Julian had involuntarily clasped together. "Julian," Arthur finally said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, which forced Julian to lean forward, violating his own boundaries. "You do realize that this report is just a collection of numbers? There is no blood in it." Arthur slowly stood up, walked to the window, and stopped with his back turned. This was a classic gesture of dominance, a demonstrative lack of fear toward the predator. "Julian," I feel my palms sweating. Why is he silent? Have I done something wrong? I must say something to fill this hole in the space. "I can redo the projection section if you think," Julian began, making the primary mistake. He started justifying himself before he was officially accused. "You have already said everything, Julian." Arthur turned around, his face absolutely motionless, like a mask. "Your problem is that you are too predictable. And predictability in this business is a form of slow suicide." 2. Phase: Psychological X-ray. At that moment, Arthur applied the tool of the informational vacuum. The human brain biologically cannot tolerate uncertainty. When a social hierarch, Arthur, creates a pause, the subordinate's limbic system, Julian, begins to generate disaster scenarios. Cognitive suppression. Arthur devalued Julian's work with a single phrase, collection of numbers, without using logical arguments. This is a direct attack on the prefrontal cortex, forcing the victim into emotional survival mode. Neurochemistry. Julian experienced a sharp release of cortisol. His pulse quickened, and the volume of his short-term memory narrowed. He entered a state of freezing, which masks itself as politeness and readiness to serve. Micromimicry. Arthur noticed a slight trembling of Julian's upper eyelid and a tilt of the head to the side, a biological signal of submission, exposing the jugular vein for a bite. 3. Phase: Psychological precedent. Julian's behavior is a classic illustration of the Solomon Asch conformity experiments. In the 1950s, Asch proved that an individual is ready to deny obvious reality, for example, the length of lines on a card, if a group or an authority figure asserts the opposite. Julian knew his report was flawless, but under the pressure of Arthur's authority, His own perception of reality began to distort. The social instinct to be accepted in the pack turned out to be stronger than logical analysis. In life, we see this everywhere. When a boss or a dominant partner in a relationship, let us say, a woman named Eleanor, who methodically destroys the self-esteem of her husband Mark, imposes a false vision of the situation, the victim accepts this vision to avoid social exile. Eleanor might say, "You always ruin everything, even when you try." And Mark, instead of analyzing the facts, begins to look for flaws in himself, confirming her power over his reality. 4. Phase, counterstrike. Julian made a mistake by filling the silence with words. In the world of dark strategies, silence is your shield and your sword. Lesson number 1. Tame the chaos of uncertainty. Never justify yourself first. If Julian possessed the tools of control, his response to Arthur's silence would have been mirrored. He should have leaned back in his chair, increasing the space he occupied, a signal of high testosterone, and maintained the pause for 2 seconds longer than Arthur. Strategic solution. Arthur, there is no blood in this report. Julian, after a long, calm pause, looking directly into Arthur's pupils. That is precisely why it is effective. Blood on the carpet interferes with calculating profit. Do you want to discuss my methods or the final result, Arthur? This is a seizure of initiative. You do not defend yourself. You present the aggressor with a choice, returning his own toxic ball to him. 5. Phase, sensory immersion. The office smelled of expensive perfume with notes of sandalwood and old leather. But for Julian, this smell became associated with the smell of dawn in a death cell. The light fell in such a way that Arthur's face was half submerged in shadow, creating a two-faced effect. Silence was no longer the absence of sound. It became a physically tangible substance, heavy and cold like mercury, filling the lungs. Every rustle of paper under Arthur's fingers sounded like the grinding of a knife against bone. Your empathy is not a virtue. It is a wide-open door through which a predator enters your house while you smile at him, holding a tray of tea. Do you think that sincerity brings people closer? In the world of high competition and destructive personalities, sincerity is a voluntary handover of the map of your minefields to the opponent. We are moving to the section where feelings become currency and your desire to help becomes your grave. Chapter 2. The Trap of Sincerity, False Vulnerability. 1. Phase, collision. Evening in a half-empty bar after a hard week. Caleb sat at the counter when Sienna, a colleague from a neighboring department, sat down next to him. She did not look like a predator. On the contrary, her shoulders were slumped, and in her eyes, one could read exhaustion bordering on despair. "Caleb, forgive me. I know we almost do not communicate outside the office," she whispered, looking into her glass. "But I feel as if I am losing my mind. The boss, Mr. Harrison, is pressuring me because of the project, and at my home, everything is falling apart. I just do not know who else to tell this to. You are the only one here who seems like a real human being." Sienna, head tilt at 15 degrees, voice trembling slightly. "I am making him feel chosen, a protector. Now he will open his gates." Caleb, damn, she's so defenseless. I always considered her strong, and yet here she is, human. I also have things to tell about Harrison's pressure. "Hey, Sienna, it is okay." Caleb moved closer, his voice becoming softer. "You are not alone. Harrison is quite a despot. To be honest, I have been looking for another job for 2 months already because his methods are simply unbearable." Caleb made a fatal mistake. He mistook false vulnerability for trust. He did not notice how Sienna straightened her back for a fraction of a second when she heard the phrase about looking for another job. The information was obtained. The trap snapped shut. 2. Phase, psychological X-ray. Sienna used the strategy of induced trust. This is a method in which an aggressor demonstrates controlled weakness to provoke the victim into a reciprocal, but already real and dangerous, frankness. Reciprocity bias. The brain is programmed to respond to a favor with a favor. If someone shares a secret with us, we feel evolutionary pressure to share something in return to restore the social balance. Dark empathy. Sienna does not feel Caleb's pain. She uses her cognitive empathy, the ability to understand the feelings of others with the mind, to precisely calculate what dose of sadness needs to be shown to trigger a release of oxytocin in Caleb, the hormone of trust and attachment. Neurochemistry. Oxytocin turns off critical thinking in the prefrontal cortex. At this moment, Caleb does not see a competitor in Sienna. He sees her as one of his own, which makes him biologically incapable of lying or caution. Phase, psychological precedent. In 1966, psychologist Elliot Aronson described the so-called pratfall effect. In the course of an experiment, it was proven that a highly competent person who makes a small mistake, for example, accidentally spilling coffee, is perceived by the audience as more likable and trustworthy than an ideal person. In life, this turns into a weapon. Professional manipulators, such as Liam, a sociopathic leader of a teenage group, or Sienna in our example, intentionally spill the coffee of their past or their failures to appear more human. They create the illusion that they are not dangerous. No, the difference is great. A real person shares a weakness to receive support. A predator shares it to gain a lever of pressure. 4. Phase, counter-strike. Caleb could have emerged from the game as a winner if he had recognized the attack as it was launched. Lesson number 2. Your personal information is an asset. Do not invest it in someone who has not proven their loyalty through years of testing. Strategic solution. When someone suddenly opens their soul, use the technique of validation without self-disclosure. Sienna, I do not know who else to tell this to. Caleb, calmly maintaining distance. That sounds truly difficult, Sienna. I am sure that with your experience, you will find a way to deal with Harrison. Have you tried contacting HR regarding his methods? The rule. Sympathize, but do not join the complaint. Remain a blank slate. If a person is truly in trouble, they will accept your support. If it is a predator, they will quickly lose interest in you, as they have not received fuel, your secrets. 5. Phase, sensory immersion. The smell of cheap whiskey and chlorine from the washed floor mixed with Sienna's perfume, heavy, musky, and cloying. The neon sign above the counter flashed with the pulse rate of a frightened animal. Red, white, red. In this rhythm, Caleb did not notice how Sienna, while adjusting her hair, was actually checking how close he was sitting, reducing the distance to a critical level. The air between them became viscous, like resin, holding Caleb in place, while his will slowly dissolved in the false warmth of someone else's sincerity. Words are noise. Silence is a verdict. Most people fear pauses because, in them, they are left alone with their insignificance. A predator knows. To break a person, one does not need to scream. One simply needs to stop confirming their existence. We are moving to the most exquisite form of psychological sadism. There are no bruises here, but there is a rupture of neural connections. We dissect silence as an instrument of personality disintegration. Chapter 3. The Vacuum of Consciousness. Gaslighting via Silence. 1. Phase. Collision. Dinner in a suburban house. Oliver carefully sets a plate on the table. Opposite him sits Harper. 10 minutes ago, Oliver timidly asked why Harper had not answered his calls all day. Harper did not answer. She continues to cut the steak. The sound of the knife scraping against the ceramic seems louder than a gunshot. Harper, I just wanted to know if everything is all right. Oliver's voice sounds pathetic. He feels it himself. Harper, I put a piece of meat in my mouth. I chew thoroughly. I look through Oliver at the wall behind his back. He begins to fidget. Excellent. His cortisol is already skyrocketing. Oliver. Why is she looking that way? Did I say something terrible? Perhaps I really am a paranoiac. My hands are shaking. I must hide them under the table. Oliver tries to catch her gaze, but Harper looks at the glass of wine as if Oliver does not exist. She's not angry. On her face is absolute, icy calmness. This is not just silence. This is an erasure. If you are angry because of that situation with your mother, then I apologized. Oliver makes a classic mistake. He begins an inventory of his sins, throwing Harper new levers of pressure. Harper slowly stands up, takes her glass, and leaves the room without making a single sound. She leaves Oliver in an absolute, informational vacuum. 2. Phase. Psychological X-ray. What Harper is doing is called ostracism, or the silent treatment. This is not the absence of communication. It is its most aggressive form. Biological destruction. Research shows that social exclusion activates the same part of the brain, the anterior cingulate cortex, that is responsible for physical pain. Oliver is not just sad. His brain is signaling that his flesh is being torn apart. Gaslighting by uncertainty. By refusing to answer, Harper forces Oliver to construct reality himself. Because the human brain is evolutionarily tuned to search for negative threats, Oliver will inevitably conclude that he is at fault. His self-esteem begins to disintegrate as it depends on feedback that he is being denied. Neurochemistry. The chronic expectation of an answer keeps Oliver in a state of constant stress. His adrenal glands ceaselessly pump cortisol, which suppresses the immune system and cognitive abilities. He literally becomes stupider under the influence of her silence. 3. Phase. Psychological precedent. In the 1970s, psychologist Edward Tronick conducted an experiment called still face. A mother first interacted actively with her infant, and then suddenly froze with an absolutely motionless, emotionless face. The child's reaction was instantaneous and horrifying. The infant tried to regain the mother's attention with smiles, gestures, and crying, and then fell into a state of deep despair and physical collapse. Oliver in this situation is that very child. Harper uses the deeply embedded biological horror of losing connection with a significant other. Adult people subjected to such influence in relationships can reach heavy depressive states and even suicidal thoughts because their I finds no reflection in the partner and begins to die. 4. Phase. Counterstrike. The primary rule of survival in a vacuum. Do not fill the void with yourself. Lesson number 3. The one who first breaks the silence for the sake of emotional relief loses the round. Reconcile with the fact that there will be no answer. Strategic solution. Oliver must realize that Harper's silence is not a problem to be solved, but an attack that must be repelled. Radical pragmatism. Stop asking questions. If she is silent, accept it as her choice. Emotional rupture. Stand up and go about your business. Turn on music, go for a walk, call a friend. Your task is to show that her silence has no power over you. The mirror. If she starts talking 2 days later as if nothing happened, do not rush to her with joy. Maintain a cold, polite distance. You must become as unpredictable and dangerous as she is. 5. Phase. Sensory immersion. The room smelled of cooling fat from the steak and expensive candle wax. The silence was not empty. It was dense, like wet wool clinging to Oliver's face. Every beat of his own heart echoed in his ears, reminding him of the ticking of a bomb. The light of the chandelier seemed too bright, burning the retina, and the shadows in the corners of the room began to pulse slowly, narrowing the space to the size of a coffin. Oliver felt a coldness emanating from the empty chair opposite him. This coldness was physical. It crawled under the skin, turning blood into crushed ice. Your need to be the only one is a catapult button that you yourself handed to the predator. As soon as you begin to prove your exceptionality, you admit that your value is not absolute, but relative. You enter a gladiatorial pit where the prize is the approval of the one who actually despises your hunger for attention. We are moving to the architecture of chaos. Chapter 4 will teach you how to turn two people into instruments of each other's self-destruction. Chapter 4. The Triangle of Submission. Triangulation Strategy. 1. Phase. Collision. A private party in a penthouse in Manhattan. The sounds of jazz are drowned in the clinking of crystal. Marcus stood at the bar, gripping his glass, and observed Evelyn. Evelyn was a woman whose intellect was sharper than her stiletto heels. She knew that Marcus was obsessed with control, and that is precisely why she did not come alone. Next to her stood Julian, younger, more athletic, with that very careless confidence that drives those who are used to calculating everything insane. Evelyn did not ignore Marcus. On the contrary, she made him the center of her game. "Marcus, darling." She touched his forearm, but her gaze lingered on Julian for a second before returning. Julian was just telling about his new project in Silicon Valley. "It is so ambitious. Do you remember you said that such startups burn out in a month? It seems you were mistaken." Evelyn, I am injecting the poison of comparison. I am not criticizing Marcus directly. I am simply placing him next to a better version, forcing him to defend his status. Marcus. Jaws clench. This pup Julian barely understands the basics of the market. Why is she looking at him that way? I need to put him in his place, show who the real player is here. Ambition is good, Marcus gritted out, addressing Julian but seeking Evelyn's approval with his eyes. But without a foundation, they turn into dust. Evelyn, you know how important stability is. Of course, Marcus. Evelyn smiled, but immediately turned to Julian, adjusting the collar of his shirt. But sometimes risk is so refreshing, do you not find? Marcus felt a cold rage boiling inside. He began to argue with Julian, to prove he was right, to shower him with terminology. He did not notice how he turned into a trained monkey jumping for Evelyn's nut of attention. 2. Phase. Psychological X-ray. Evelyn applied triangulation, the creation of artificial rivalry to strengthen her own power. Dopamine loop. When Evelyn gives Marcus crumbs of attention and then switches it to Julian, she creates a deficit. Marcus's brain begins to desperately demand dopamine, approval, and the only way to obtain it is to defeat the competitor. Social comparison theory. People evaluate themselves not by objective criteria, but in comparison with those around them. By introducing a third into the equation. Evelyn destroys Marcus's self-sufficiency. Now his self-esteem depends on whether he is better or worse than Julian in her eyes. Neurochemistry. Marcus is simultaneously experiencing testosterone, aggression/competition, and adrenaline, fear of loss. This is a cocktail that turns off logic. Marcus thinks he is fighting for the truth in business, but in reality, he is fighting for the right to be the favorite slave in Evelyn's system. 3. Phase, psychological precedent. This mechanism was clearly demonstrated by Muzafer Sharif in his famous Robber's Cave experiment. He divided a group of ordinary, balanced teenagers into 2 teams and created conditions of fierce competition for resources and prizes between them. The result was frightening. Within a few days, yesterday's friends turned into enemies who hated each other. They began to demonize outsiders and extol their own, simply to feel their own significance through conflict. In life, a predator, a boss, a partner, a parent, creates a robber's cave situation in miniature. He might say to an employee, "You know, Stephen works twice as little as you, but his indicators are somehow higher." Or to a partner in a relationship, "My ex never asked such questions." The goal is one, to force you to hate the third and to serve the first. 4. Phase, counterstrike. Marcus lost at the moment he began to compete. The only way to win in triangulation is to destroy the geometry of the triangle. Lesson number 4. Never compete for a place that belongs to you by right. If you are forced to prove your value, you are already devalued. Strategic solution. 1. Exit the game. As soon as you feel that you are being compared to someone, explicitly or implicitly, immediately stop the struggle. Become absolutely indifferent to the result. 2. Unification. Pattern break. Make the competitor your ally. If Marcus had said, "Julian, your project sounds amazing. We absolutely must discuss a partnership. Evelyn, thank you for introducing us," he would have instantly destroyed Evelyn's lever of power. She would have ceased to be the judge in their dispute. 3. Radical pragmatism. Evaluate Evelyn not as a prize, but as a source of toxicity. A predator using triangulation will never be satisfied. He does not need a winner. He needs the process of your struggle. 5. Phase, sensory immersion. The smell of expensive gin with juniper bitterness became unbearably sharp. The light from the crystal chandeliers broke into thousands of fragments, each of which stabbed into Marcus's eyes. Evelyn's laughter, light, shimmering, seemed like the grinding of metal on glass. In this penthouse, amidst silk and gold, Marcus suddenly felt the smell of a menagerie, the wild, animal smell of fear and filth hidden under expensive perfume. The floor under his feet seemed slanted, leading into an infinite abyss, and Julian and Evelyn looked like flat cardboard figures behind which there was nothing but black emptiness. Do you feel this itch? It is your ego demanding a rematch. But remember, in this game, a rematch is an even deeper dive into the trap. Truth is an overvalued resource. In a world where everyone seeks to feel your carotid artery, absolute honesty is equal to a voluntary harakiri. Your task is not to hide your weaknesses, but to create them. A predator always looks for a point of entry. If he does not find it, he becomes suspicious and cautious. If, however, you yourself offer him a breach in your armor, he loses vigilance, throwing all his strength into attacking the false target. While he gnaws on the substituted dummy, you are preparing the final shot. Chapter 5. Information poisoning. Bait for the aggressor. 1. Phase, collision. A high-rise bar in central London. Sebastian, a man whose reputation was built on absorbing small companies and destroying careers, sipped whiskey, looking at Lucas. Lucas was a rising star, and Sebastian had already marked him as the next victim. He needed to find a lever. "You know, Lucas," Sebastian leaned forward, lowering his voice to a confidential rumble, "in our business, it is important to have a reliable rear. They say your project in Singapore is hanging by a thread due to licensing issues?" Sebastian: "I am probing him. Now he will either start sweating or defend himself too zealously. His reaction will give away the truth." Lucas: "I knew he would ask about this. I myself spread this rumor through mutual acquaintances 2 weeks ago. It is time to feed the beast." Lucas looked away. His fingers drummed nervously on the table, a gesture that Sebastian instantly identified as a sign of stress. I would not want to talk about it here, Sebastian. We are managing. It is just temporary difficulties with the documents." Lucas stumbled, imitating an attempt to hide panic. In reality, Singapore had been closed a month ago with an ideal result, which Sebastian could not know because of the informational blockade. Of course, Sebastian smiled predatorily. He was certain he had found Lucas's Achilles heel. He thinks he is frightened. He is weak. I will strike at his Singaporean assets tomorrow morning, and he will crawl to me for help himself. 2. Phase, psychological X-ray. Lucas applied the technique of informational camouflage, exploiting Sebastian's fundamental errors of perception. Confirmation. Bias. Sebastian already considered Lucas prey. When Lucas provided him with proof of his weakness, a nervous gesture, an admission of problems, Sebastian's brain instantly accepted this information without verification, as it confirmed his internal setup. Cognitive load. By creating a false problem, Lucas forces Sebastian to spend intellectual and financial resources on attacking a void. While Sebastian analyzes non-existent problems in Singapore, his real vigilance regarding Lucas's current deals drops to zero. Neurochemistry. Sebastian experiences a powerful surge of dopamine, C8H11NO2. The anticipation of victory turns off critical thinking. He is in a state of hunter's euphoria, which makes him biologically incapable of noticing the trap. Lucas, on the other hand, keeps the level of his norepinephrine, C8H11NO3, normal, maintaining cold calculation. 3. Phase, psychological precedent. This strategy is based on the phenomenon of inattentional blindness, a classic example of which is the experiment by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabry, the invisible gorilla. When subjects are asked to count the number of passes between players in white t-shirts, they completely ignore a person in a gorilla suit walking through the center of the court. In the psychology of influence, it works like this. If you force the enemy to focus on a bright object, your imaginary weakness, he will not notice the gorilla, your real capture strategy. Sebastian is so busy counting passes, problems in Singapore, that he does not see how Lucas is already overbuying his key suppliers right under his nose. 4. Phase, counter-strike. Lucas intercepted control over Sebastian's consciousness by providing him with a false map of reality. Lesson number 5. Your weakness must be plausible enough to be believed and painful enough to be targeted for attack. Strategic solution. 1. Create noise. Choose an area of your life or business that seems important but is not actually critical. 2. Simulate a leak. Information about your problem must reach the enemy not from you, but through third hands. Use triangulation from the previous chapter. 3. Demonstrate resistance. When the enemy tries to press on this point, resist clumsily. This will convince him that he is on the right path. 4. Stab in the back. While the aggressor concentrates resources on the false target, deliver a strike where he has left his rear open. 5. Phase. Sensory immersion. The air in the bar was saturated with the smell of expensive tobacco and ozone from the air conditioners. The lights of the night city outside the window seemed like blurred neon scars on the body of the darkness. Sebastian sat in the shadow, and his eyes glinted like those of a reptile sensing warmth. The sound of ice hitting the walls of the glass of whiskey reminded one of the cracking of bones under the jaws of a predator. Lucas felt the cold smoothness of the tabletop under his fingers and knew, in this room, only one person sees reality. The second is merely a spectator in a theater of shadows that Lucas built specifically for him. Your freedom is not the absence of walls. It is the presence of the will to jump. But what if I tell you that the walls in your head are built not of stone, but of your own failures, which were carefully highlighted for you? The most effective way to enslave a person is not to lock him in a cage, but to convince him that the key to the door has turned to dust, and beyond the threshold, only an abyss awaits him. We are moving to the study of mental paralysis. Chapter 6 will reveal the mechanism that forces you to voluntarily remain in hell even when the door is not locked. Chapter 6. The Death of the Will. Learned Helplessness Syndrome. 1. Phase. Collision. A quiet suburban house, flooded with the soft light of floor lamps. Thomas sat at the kitchen table. Before him lay a booklet of game design courses, his long-held dream, which he finally decided to realize. Grace, his wife, entered the room. She did not scream. She simply placed a cup of tea before him and sighed almost imperceptibly, almost sympathetically. Those courses again, Tom? Her voice was full of feigned care that stung worse than a wasp. You surely remember what happened with your landscape project last year, and with that attempt at investments? Grace, I am not forbidding him. I am simply reminding him of the pain. I am activating his defeat neural network. His shoulders are already slumped. Thomas. A cold lump formed in my stomach. She's right. I always start and lose. Why spend money that is already scarce? I will simply disgrace myself again. I just thought that this time everything is different. Thomas muttered, slowly closing the booklet. Darling, I just want to protect you from another disappointment. Grace touched the back of his head gently, but her fingers were cold. You know what the market is like now. You need stability, not illusions. Let us just watch a series. Thomas stood up obediently. He did not notice how Grace threw a winner's glance at the booklet for a fraction of a second, a glance that just confirmed the right of ownership over someone else's life. 2. Phase. Psychological X-ray. Grace uses the classic strategy of induced helplessness. She methodically builds a cordon of Thomas's past mistakes around him, turning them into an insurmountable wall. Beck's cognitive triad. Grace attacks 3 directions. The vision of oneself, you are a failure. The world, the market is cruel. And the future, there will only be disappointment. Neurochemistry of paralysis. Constant reminders of failures suppress the production of dopamine and activate the amygdala, the center of fear. Over time, the level of BDNF, a protein responsible for brain plasticity, in Thomas drops. His brain physically loses the ability to learn new things and see ways out. Intermittent reinforcement. Grace alternates care with devaluation. This creates a state of cognitive dissonance in Thomas. He cannot rebel against her because she wants what is best. 3. Phase. Psychological precedent. In 1967, psychologist Martin Seligman conducted an experiment that became the foundation for understanding depression. Dogs were divided into 3 groups. The first group could stop electric shocks by pressing a panel. The second group received the same shocks, but their actions influenced nothing. The shock stopped only when the first dog turned it off. The third group received no shocks. Then all the dogs were placed in an enclosure with a low barrier that was easy to jump over to escape the shock. The dogs from the first and third groups jumped instantly. The dogs from the second group, those who had learned that their efforts were useless, simply lay on the floor and whimpered, accepting the shocks even when the path to escape was open. Thomas is that dog from the second group. Grace is the one who controls the supply of electricity. She convinced him that the panel does not work, and now he does not need chains. He is held by his own memory of impotence. 4. Phase. Counter-strike. The exit from this state lies not through positive thinking, but through radical action bypassing the logic of fear. Lesson number 6. Your helplessness is a false hypothesis. Test it with action, even if it seems meaningless. Strategic solution. 1. The principle of small wins. Thomas does not need to change his career immediately. He needs to take a step that he can control without Grace's knowledge. Buy a textbook. Complete 1 free lesson, secretly. 2. Information hygiene. Stop sharing plans with someone who systematically extinguishes them. As soon as Thomas opened his mouth, he gave Grace the remote control for his fear. 3. Deconstruction of care. Every time you hear, "I want to protect you," translate it as, "I want you to remain weak and predictable." 5. Phase. Sensory immersion. The house smelled of lavender freshener and stagnant dust on the bookshelves. The light of the television that Grace turned on pulsed with a bluish, deathly light, turning faces into masks. Thomas felt as if his limbs were being filled with lead, as if gravity in this room had become 10 times stronger. The sound of the working refrigerator in the kitchen seemed like the monotonous hum of a giant mechanism grinding time. The air was dry and bland, devoid of the smell of possibilities, and the walls of the house were slowly closing in, compressing the space to the size of his chair, from which he no longer had the strength to rise. Predictability is your prison. Every manipulator is, first of all, an algorithm. He has studied your reactions as a grandmaster studies the openings of a novice. He knows that to aggression you will respond with defense, and to coldness with an attempt to please. As long as you play according to the victim-aggressor scenario, you are doomed. To defeat the system, you must become a system error. You must become a glitch in his reality. We are moving to the section on chaos. Chapter 7 will teach you how to destroy the strategies of others with a single illogical move. Chapter 7. Breaking the script. Pattern interrupt. 1. Phase. Collision. The boardroom of a law firm in the skyscraper, the Shard. Mr. Blackwood, a lawyer with a reputation as a bulldozer, was conducting an interrogation of Isabella as part of an internal investigation. Blackwood used the classic tactics of suppression. He sat too close, his voice was mockingly loud, and on the table before Isabella, he laid out folders with incriminating evidence. "So, Isabella." Blackwood sharply slammed the folders shut, creating a gunshot effect. "We both know that your signature is under this contract. The question is only whether you confess now or we meet in court. You have exactly 30 seconds. Blackwood. I have cornered her. Now she will either start crying or justifying herself. In both cases, she will acknowledge my power. Isabella. I feel how adrenaline constricts my throat. My brain screams, defend yourself. But if I start defending myself, I will confirm his scenario. I must break the rhythm. Isabella remained silent. She slowly took an ordinary orange out of her bag. With absolute, almost meditative calmness, she began to peel it. Blackwood froze mid-sentence. Isabella, do you hear me? His voice became a tone higher. Irritation flashed in it. He thinks, what is she doing? Is this mockery? She should be afraid. Isabella carefully separated a segment, examined it closely, and handed it to Blackwood. Do you want some? She asked with sincere interest, as if they were sitting in a park rather than at an interrogation. There's a lot of vitamin C here. They say stress washes it out of the body. You look tense. Blackwood stopped short. His prepared tirade crumbled. He expected fear, but he received an offer to eat an orange. His brain hung for a fraction of a second, trying to reconcile the seriousness of the moment with the absurdity of the action. 2. Phase Psychological X-ray. Isabella applied a pattern interrupt. This is a sharp change in expected behavior that causes temporary cognitive paralysis in an opponent. Rupture of the predictive model. The brain constantly builds forecasts. Blackwood expected reaction B to his stimulus A. When Isabella produced reaction X, the orange, Blackwood's predictive model collapsed. Trance state. At the moment of the pattern break, a person falls into a short-term trance. The prefrontal cortex is overloaded, trying to find meaning in an absurd action. And at that moment, the opponent becomes maximally vulnerable to suggestion. Neurochemistry. Instead of the expected cortisol response, fear, Isabella provoked cognitive dissonance in Blackwood. His brain switched from attack mode to anomaly analysis mode. 3. Phase Psychological Precedent. In 1994, researchers led by Santos conducted an experiment known as the peak technique. Piquing curiosity technique. On the street, people were asked for alms in 2 ways. In the first case, they asked for a quarter, 25 cents. In the second, 17 cents or 37 cents. The results were striking. The request for a specific, strange amount increased the number of donations by 60%. Why? Because the request, give me some change, is a scenario to which the brain has a ready answer of no. The request for 17 cents forces the brain to stop and ask, why exactly that much? This micro-question turns off the automatic refusal and makes the person more pliable. Isabella with her orange is the very 17 cents. She took Blackwood out of the automatic predator mode into a mode of confusion. 4. Phase Counter-strike. Breaking the script is not about humor. It is about control over the context. Lesson number 7. If the rules of the game lead to your defeat, play another game right in the middle of the round. Strategic solution. 1. Act inadequately to the context. If someone shouts at you, start whispering. If someone insults you, sincerely praise a detail of the aggressor's clothing. 2. Absurd question. Use the out-of-place technique. In the midst of a conflict, ask, by the way, do you happen to remember what the humidity index is today? This will force the opponent to step out of character for a second. 3. Maintain seriousness. The effect of the break works only when you are absolutely calm yourself. If you giggle, it looks like hysteria. If you peel an orange with the face of a surgeon, it looks like dominance. 5. Phase. Sensory immersion. The office smelled of ozone from the working photocopier and cold metal. The light of the lamps reflected in the polished surface of the table, turning it into a black lake. The smell of citrus, sharp, fresh, out of place, cut through this sterile atmosphere like a scalpel. Isabella heard how London hummed outside the window, but here, inside, time froze. The peel of the orange under her nails sprayed essential oil, and this tiny sound seemed louder than all of Blackwood's heavy breathing. In this second, she was the only living object in a room full of corporate ghosts. Are you ready to stop being predictable? Or is it more comfortable for you in your usual role of the victim, where everything is clear and safe in its horror? Your anger is not your strength. It is a leak in your reactor. When you are angry, you stop seeing reality and begin to see only your projections. But the most interesting part begins when you force another person to choke on their own bile. Most people try to smooth over the corners or be liked by an enemy to reduce pressure. This is a slave strategy. A predator's strategy is to pour oil onto the fire of someone else's hatred so that the flame blinds the opponent. We will turn his cognitive distortions into his own scaffold. Chapter 8. The Trap of Induced Hatred. Reverse Franklin Effect. 1. Phase. Collision. A charity evening in a rooftop loft. Victor stood at the parapet, observing Oliver, his longtime competitor, who had just lost a major tender to Victor. Oliver was on the edge. His face had acquired the shade of raw meat, and his fingers gripped his glass so tightly that his knuckles were white. Victor did not avoid the meeting. On the contrary, he approached Oliver when the latter was surrounded by influential sponsors. Oliver, a wonderful evening, is it not? Victor smiled, but his eyes remained cold and evaluating. I heard about your defeat. You know, at your age, it is useful to sometimes return to basics. It humbles. Victor, I see how the corner of his mouth twitches. A classic microconvulsion of the masseter muscle. He wants to hit me. I am giving him a reason to feel righteously incensed. Do you think you won because you are better? Oliver hissed this loudly enough for a couple of people to turn around. Oliver, he is mocking me. He is. He considers me worthless. I will destroy him here, right now. I will show everyone who he really is. I think you are simply tired, Oliver. Victor slightly patted him on the shoulder, a gesture of condescension that for a person with a wounded ego is equivalent to a slap. Take a vacation, at my expense, if necessary. Oliver could not stand it. He splashed the remains of the wine in Victor's face. A deathly silence fell in the hall. Victor did not flinch. He slowly took out a handkerchief and began to wipe his face, maintaining a light, almost sympathetic smile on his lips. Oliver looked like an hysterical failure against the background of Victor's icy calmness. The strategic victory was secured by Oliver's social suicide. 2. Phase psychological X-ray. Victor used the reverse Benjamin Franklin effect in combination with the provocation of narcissistic rage, cognitive dissonance, and self-justification. When Oliver committed the first act of aggression, splashed the wine, his brain required an instantaneous justification. I did this because he is a monster. To maintain this illusion, Oliver had to intensify his hatred to the limit. He became a slave to his own need to justify his inadequacy. Amygdala hijack. Victor's calm provoked a release of adrenaline and norepinephrine in Oliver. In this state, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for logic and consequences, turns off. Oliver switched to fight-or-flight mode, losing the ability to evaluate social context and reputational risks. Tunnel vision. In a state of rage, Oliver stopped seeing the surrounding sponsors. For him, only the enemy Victor existed. He became blind to reality, which led to his public collapse. 3. Phase. Psychological precedent. This strategy relies on Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance. In one of his experiments, it was proven if a person commits a cruel act toward an innocent person, he begins to hate the victim more than before. The brain cannot admit, "I am bad." Therefore, it generates the thought, "He deserved it." In life, this turns into a spiral of degradation. Let us recall a clinical case from forensic psychology. Let us call the patient James. James began with minor insults toward his colleague Sarah. In order not to feel guilt for his behavior, he convinced himself that Sarah was a conspirator and a spy. His hatred grew exponentially, unsupported by any facts, until he committed an assault. It was not Sarah who destroyed him, but his own need to justify his initial dislike. Victor in our plot simply accelerated this process for Oliver, holding up a mirror in which Oliver looked like a monster. 4. Phase. Counterstrike. If someone tries to provoke you, they are looking for your reaction as a confirmation of their power. Deprive them of this. Lesson number 8. Your calmness during someone else's aggression is the highest form of dominance. Allow the enemy to choke in his own rage. Strategic solution. 1. Status reduction via care. Use phrases like, "Are you all right? You seem very unstable." "You need to sit down. Your hands are shaking." This deprives the aggressor of the halo of a strong warrior and turns him into a sick patient. 2. The mirror effect. Remain motionless. The more actively the enemy gestures, the less you should move. This creates a visual contrast. You are a rock. He is a fish thrashing in convulsions. 3. Use the audience. Never respond to aggression with aggression in the presence of third parties. Allow everyone to see his true face. Your silence will say more than any accusations. 5. Phase. Sensory immersion. In the loft, it smelled of expensive perfume mixed with the sour smell of spilled red wine. Drops of liquid flowed down Victor's face, warm and sticky as fresh blood. But he felt only the cold of metal inside himself. The sounds of jazz in the background became unbearably clear. Every beat of the double bass resonated in his chest. The light from the spotlights reflected in Oliver's dilated pupils, turning them into 2 bottomless black holes in which there was neither thought nor will, only pure, primordial chaos. The world around them slowed down, turning into a series of freeze frames where Victor was the only clear object in this whirlwind of someone else's madness. Do you see how easy it is to destroy a person simply by giving him a reason to manifest his worst side? Oliver thought he was attacking. In reality, he was simply jumping into an abyss that Victor had carefully illuminated. Morality is a crutch for those who are afraid to walk independently. It is a social contract written by the weak to limit the strong. While you ask yourself, is this ethical? Your opponent asks, does this work? In biology, there is no concept of sin. There is only adaptation and extinction. Your conscience is only the voice of your parents and teachers in your head, designed to make you convenient and safe for the system. We have reached the final frontier. We will dissect your will. Chapter 9. The Anatomy of the Will, Beyond Good and Evil. 1. Phase: Collision. A rainy evening in a townhouse in Belgravia. Evan sat in his office, studying documents. An hour ago, he learned that his close friend and business partner Chloe was secretly conducting negotiations for the sale of their shared stake to competitors, effectively leaving Evan with nothing. Chloe entered the room with 2 glasses of wine. She was smiling, that very sincere smile that Evan had trusted for 10 years. "Evan, you look exhausted," she said, placing the glass on the table. "We need to rest. Perhaps we should fly to Tuscany for the weekend." "Chloe, I see he suspects something. I need to strengthen the emotional connection. Sentimentality is the best glue for those you're going to betray." Evan, inside me, everything screams. How could she? I want to throw these papers in her face. I want justice. But justice is a prize for losers. I need victory. Evan did not show any sign. He slowly took the glass and slightly sipped the wine. "Tuscany is a wonderful idea, Chloe. But first, we need to sign those additional agreements on asset insurance. Remember, we discussed this on Monday?" Chloe hesitated. In those papers was a hidden clause about the right of first refusal in the event of a hidden transfer of shares, which effectively nullified her deal and transferred her assets to Evan in the case of betrayal. Now, perhaps in the morning? She touched his hand, using tactile contact to reduce his vigilance. "In the morning, I am flying to a meeting." Evan smiled back at her. "Sign now, and we shall forget about work until Monday itself." He watched as she placed her signature, signing her own professional death warrant. At that moment, Evan ceased to be a friend. He became a function of the will. 2. Phase: Psychological X-ray. Evan made the transition from slave morality to radical pragmatism. He suppressed the natural impulse for an emotional discharge, a scandal, for the sake of achieving a strategic advantage. Suppression of the empathic neural network. To make this move, Evan deactivated the anterior insular lobe of the brain, responsible for empathy. He transferred Chloe from the category of close person to the category of obstacle/resource. Moral detachment. This is a mechanism that allows one to ignore ethical norms for the sake of a higher goal. Evan did not feel guilt because his new internal logic stated, "Chloe's betrayal nullified the social contract. Now I am in a state of war, and in war, ethics are excess weight." Neurochemistry. Instead of oxytocin-driven trust, Evan maintained a high level of serotonin, C10H12N2O, which provides social dominance and calmness under pressure. 3. Phase: Psychological precedent. This transition is excellently illustrated by the third wave experiment, conducted by history teacher Ron Jones in 1967. Over 5 days, he turned ordinary American school children into a disciplined, harsh group resembling a totalitarian sect. The students instantly discarded their previous moral values: equality, freedom of speech, kindness, for the sake of the feeling of power and order. Morality turned out to be an incredibly fragile superstructure that collapses as soon as a person is offered an effective strategy of dominance and belonging to a higher caste. In life, we see this in highly effective CEOs or politicians. They are not evil in the everyday sense. They simply understand that morality is a variable, not a constant. When the survival of a structure is at stake, a good person is one who provides a result, not one who follows commandments. Chloe in our story used morality as a cover for an attack. Evan used the rejection of morality as a shield and a sword. 4. Phase. Counterstrike. Your weakness is your belief that the world owes you something for your kindness. Lesson number 9. The will to power begins where the need for excuses ends. Your only duty is to your potential. Strategic solution. 1. Inventory of connections. Review your environment. Who among these people is near you only because you are convenient? Get rid of them. 2. The aesthetic of the result. Make decisions based on their effectiveness, not on how they look in the eyes of society. If a lie saves your empire and the truth destroys it, then lie with dignity. 3. Killing the internal judge. Every time you feel a sting of guilt, ask yourself, to whom is this sting beneficial? Who taught me to feel this? Usually, the answer is, those who want to control you. 5. Phase. Sensory immersion. The office smelled of old parchment and cold rain, seeping through the slightly open window. The sound of the pen sliding over the paper as Chloe signed seemed like a deafening grinding of a scythe. The wine in Evan's glass was the color of venous blood, thick and heavy. The light of the desk lamp picked out only Chloe's hands, fragile, with a flawless manicure, which now looked like the paws of a bird caught in a trap. Evan felt how the air around him became dense and electric, as if before a storm. He was no longer part of this cozy house. He was the storm itself, cold and inevitable. Chloe does not yet know that she has lost everything. She thinks they will go to Tuscany. But tomorrow morning she will wake up in a world where her friendship no longer has market value. Your path ends here, at the point of assembly. You have studied the tools. You have seen how the fabric of someone else's illusions is torn. But you are still afraid of yourself. You hide your dark side in the basement of your consciousness, hoping it will not crawl out at an inopportune moment. Mistake. Your shadow is not a tumor. It is your claws. It is your fuel. The one who denies his capacity for violence is not a kind person. He is simply defenseless. Only the one who has tamed his inner beast, put it in a tuxedo, and taught it to smile without hiding its readiness to strike, is truly dangerous and successful. We are concluding the investigation. Chapter 10 will teach you the unity that makes you invulnerable. Chapter 10. The monolith of power. Integration of the shadow. 1. Phase. Collision. A private club in Mayfair. Xavier sat in a leather chair, sipping a rare single malt whiskey. Opposite him was Lydia, a woman who believed she fully controlled him through his light side. His devotion, his manners, his love for order. Lydia was a master of soft manipulation. She had spent years molding Xavier into the ideal partner who would serve her ambitions. Xavier, darling. Lydia touched his wrist, her voice full of tenderness behind which an order was hidden. You surely understand that tomorrow, at the board of directors, you must support my proposal. It is a matter of our common stability. Lydia. I know all his pressure points. He values our connection too much to go against me. He is my best tool. Xavier. She sees the mask. She sees Xavier the gentleman. She forgot that a gentleman is simply a predator who knows how to use cutlery. It is time to show her what she tried so hard to suppress. Xavier did not remove his hand. He looked her directly in the eyes, long, without blinking. His gaze changed. The warmth disappeared. giving way to a heavy, icy calmness that Lydia had never seen before. It was the gaze of a person who had just made a decision about liquidation. Lydia? His voice became an octave lower. It vibrated with hidden threat. Your proposal is a strategic error, and tomorrow I shall not merely fail to support it. I shall present an audit of your latest deals. You have played the architect too much, forgetting that the foundation beneath you is mine. Lydia recoiled, her face distorted by sudden fear. She thinks this is not him. This is some kind of monster. Where is my Xavier? Why can I not read him? You would not do that. You surely love me. Her voice broke into a whisper. That is precisely why I shall do it. Xavier smiled slightly, and in that smile, there was not a drop of sympathy. So that you never again confuse my love with my weakness. 2. Phase. Psychological X-ray. Xavier demonstrated the integration of the shadow. He did not allow anger to seize him, but he also did not suppress it. He used the destructive potential of his shadow as a tool to protect his interests. Differentiation of persona and shadow. Xavier realizes that his social face, the persona, is only an interface. When Lydia tried to hack this interface, he activated the core, the shadow, neurochemistry of dominance. At this moment, Xavier has an ideal balance of testosterone, C19H2802, and serotonin, C10H12N20. Testosterone provides the determination for conflict, while serotonin provides social calmness and the absence of impulsivity. In Lydia, however, a sharp spike in cortisol, C21H30O5, occurred, paralyzing her ability to counterattack. Radical authenticity. Xavier stopped spending energy on maintaining the image of a good guy. This released energy went into strengthening his will. He became a monolith, a being in which there are no internal contradictions. 3. Phase. Psychological precedent. The most powerful example of how social roles suppress or release the shadow is the Stanford Prison Experiment by Philip Zimbardo, 1971. Ordinary students, having received the role of guards, turned into sadists in a matter of days. Zimbardo proved the shadow lives in everyone. But more importantly, the participants who did not realize their shadow became its slaves. Those, however, who in life understood their capacity for aggression were able to maintain control. In life, integration looks different. Let us take a clinical case. Let us call the patient Robert. Robert was a chronically kind employee whom everyone exploited. After a course of psychotherapy aimed at shadow integration, he did not become a criminal. He simply learned to say no in a tone that did not permit objections. He ceased to be a victim because he recognized the aggressor in himself and put it at the service of his career. Xavier in our story did the same with Lydia. He used his dark resolve to save the business from her incompetence. 4. Phase. Counterstrike. Your final task is to stop fighting with yourself. Lesson number 10. Your shadow is your strength. If you do not own it, it owns you. Become whole. Strategic solution. 1. Acknowledge your demons. Write down everything you hate in yourself or consider bad. Hunger for power, rage, selfishness. These are not enemies. These are your sleeping legions. 2. Give the shadow work. Do not allow rage to splash out onto loved ones. Direct it at destroying obstacles in business. Use your coldness for making difficult decisions. 3. Stop apologizing for your strength. If your success causes someone discomfort, that is their problem of adaptation, not your sin. A predator does not apologize to the prey for being hungry. 5. Phase. Sensory immersion. In the club, it smelled of expensive Cuban tobacco and old wood soaked in decades of men's secrets. The twilight ate the corners of the room, leaving only Xavier and Lydia in the circle of light from the heavy chandelier. The ice in Xavier's glass clinked. The sound was clear and sharp, like the strike of a blade. Lydia felt how the air around Xavier became dense and heavy, as if he had physically increased in size. The smell of his perfume, vetiver and steel, now seemed like the smell of danger emanating from a wild beast that no longer intends to pretend to be domestic. The investigation is complete. You are no longer a resource. You are a player. You have become dangerous, and now success does not merely seek you out. It is afraid to lose you. Requiem for the victim. The investigation is over. We have dissected your weakness, layer by layer removing the strips of social lies with which you were fed from birth. Now you stand before the mirror and see not a good person, but a biological unit that has realized its fangs. The world has not changed during this time. It has remained just as cold, hierarchical, and merciless. You have changed. You no longer seek approval in the eyes of predators because you yourself have become the one whose gaze forces others to look away. Your empathy now is not an automatic reaction, but a tool that you turn on and off at your discretion. Your morality is not a cage, but a conscious choice of strategy. Your new code. 1. The shadow is your foundation. Power that you have acknowledged can no longer stab you in the back. It is your faithful adjutant, whispering the truth when others lie. 2. Silence is your armor. You no longer fear pauses. You own them. The one who can remain silent the longest controls the room. 3. Success is a side effect of danger. When the world understands that you can destroy its rules, it begins to offer you its best gifts so that you play on its side. Sensory finale. An absolute ringing silence has descended in the room. You feel how the cold air from the window touches your skin, but it no longer causes a shiver. The smell of old paper and ozone has been replaced by the smell of fresh iron and night ozone. The smell of a storm that is about to begin. The light of the lamps no longer blinds you. It emphasizes the edges of your new reality. You hear your own breathing, even deep, devoid of fear. You no longer wait to be chosen. You yourself choose the targets. You have stepped out of the food chain and stood above it. Now you are a system error that writes its own rules. Go and take that which belongs to you by right of will. Knowledge of the mechanisms of the psyche is your primary freedom. Subscribe to explore the hidden facets of human behavior together. And be sure to write in the comments which psychological pattern or strategy we shall analyze next time. Let us seek the truth together.